You're listening to an Ono Media podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Into the Dark podcast. I'm your host, Peyton Moreland. Thank you so much for being here. If you are watching on YouTube, can you please give this video a thumbs up and maybe leave a comment below? And if you are listening on audio and can leave a review or just head over and give me a follow on Instagram, it's just a great way to support the show. I'm sorry, I'm gonna continue to beg. Okay, this is my little baby and I gotta take care of it. Getting into my 10 seconds, as you guys know, I've been going to the chiropractor to try and align my spine and fix my posture, and I really do think it's working, but I also could be, placebo effect. But honestly, either way, I feel a little bit better, and that's great. Miss Daisy May is currently in heat, and before you come at me, we are in contact with her vet. We have talked to her vet about the entire thing. Okay, we are not breeding her. Just kind of working through some things with the vet. So thank you for your concern. But she is in heat and just needing extra snuggles and love. And so I've just been kind of cuddling her a lot. And I think it's so sad that puppies can have cramps. That's so sad. We're also getting a new couch. And so we currently don't have a couch in our living room. So we just have our rug and laid some blankets out, and honestly, it's been kind of fun. We've just been laying out there. Daisy loves to run around without the couch in the way, but yeah, I think that is coming this week, hopefully. So yeah, that'll be fun. Honestly, I don't have too much going on as of late. I feel like just kind of in that season of life where everything's starting to pick back up. Every single person's going back to school. We're just on the grind. Everyone's on the grind. But that being said, let's get into today's episode. I think most of us like to believe that we can trust our own memories. Even if we're terrible at remembering things and regularly forget appointments, items on our to-do lists, and important names and faces, we still believe that when we're thinking back on the past, the things we recall are accurate. But I have bad news for all of us. Science says that our memories are notoriously unreliable. In fact, laboratory studies say that we regularly misremember things. In some cases, our recollections change just a few seconds after the thing we're trying to remember happens, which means even when you're thinking back on your fondest memories, you're not accurately recalling the past. And when you think back on the terrible events in your life, those memories aren't always 100% honest either. But it is worth asking. If you can't trust your own mind and your own memories, how can you understand anything about yourself in your own life? Now, I know that's obviously a huge, terrifying question to ask, and a lot of us don't devote a lot of time to deep philosophical issues like that. But back in 1993, neither did a woman named Kelly Cahill. Well, to be accurate, her name wasn't Kelly Cahill. That's a pseudonym. Kelly hasn't come forward with her real identity, but that's the name that she's best known by. I do know that at the time, Kelly was a 25-year-old mother, a committed wife, and a devout Christian. It's a true story. She spent most of her time thinking about how to coordinate her kids' schedules and get more involved at church. She wasn't used to pondering big philosophical questions, not until the evening of August 7th. So that night, young Kelly and her husband, Andrew, were visiting a friend for their birthday. And for context, Kelly lived outside of Melbourne, Australia. And the friend's house was about an hour and a half away by car. So she and Andrew were in for a long drive to get to the birthday party. But something strange happened while they were on the road. As they were driving by an empty field, Kelly glanced over and saw an orange light off in the distance. Looked like something was sitting on the ground in the middle of the field, kind of emitting a soft glow. But Kelly didn't know actually what it was. In fact, it was hard for her to make out anything at all because the object was surrounded by some kind of fog or haze. The point is, Kelly didn't get a very good look at this thing, but for some reason, she had a feeling, like in her gut, that it was important. In fact, she didn't know how she knew this, but when she looked out, she did not think this thing was from Earth. She believed immediately that it was something supernatural. Now, Kelly's first thought is that this is a sign from God, like he was trying to tell her something, but she wasn't sure what. So she turned to Andrew to ask him what he thought the light in the field was. But Andrew's response was confusing. He told Kelly he had no idea what she was talking about. He hadn't seen anything. Now, of course, Kelly had a hard time believing that because the light had been so bright and so obvious. How could he have missed it? She actually concluded in the car that Andrew was pretending he hadn't seen anything, maybe as a prank. But then, once they get to the party, Andrew began teasing Kelly in front of their friends. He claimed that she had seen a UFO and she believed in aliens. Now, this isn't true. Kelly didn't believe in aliens, and she didn't think the light had been from outer space, but also she knew how the real story sounded. I mean, she knew she couldn't defend herself without sounding like some kind of UFO chaser. So she kind of just laughed along with Andrew and acted like it was a funny joke, but deep down, she was hurt and embarrassed that he was talking about her this way and talking about this weird experience that was very real to her that had just happened that she couldn't explain. So after this, she's so humiliated that she didn't even want to talk about it anymore. She was prepared to just go home and forget what she had seen. Except then, during the drive back to her house from that birthday party, she and Andrew saw the light again, and this time it wasn't on the ground in some distant field. It was hovering in the sky just a little bit to the left of the road. The haze from before was gone. And it was close enough to them and clear enough that Kelly got a really good look at the light and where it was coming from. To her, it looked like a blimp that was covered in windows. And the windows were lit up orange, and that's the glow that she had seen before. Kelly could even spot silhouettes in the windows, like there were people on this blimp looking out at the world. Now, Kelly asked Andrew if he noticed it this time, and he's like, okay, yeah, I did. But he still refused to acknowledge that it was anything supernatural. But at least Kelly felt less crazy. He tells her it's probably an experimental military plane. But as for Kelly, she still thought it was something divine, like God was trying to speak to her. So the two of them debated for a while, even after they had driven past the ship and it had disappeared in the distance, but they couldn't stop talking about it. It seemed like they were never going to agree. They were never going to settle the matter until something appeared on the road ahead of them. It was another ship, but it was much bigger than the first one. It was somewhere between the size of an Olympic swimming pool and a sports stadium. But other than that, it looked almost identical to the other one, and it was floating directly over the road. Now, Kelly and Andrew get closer, and a beam of light shot out of the ship, and it illuminated the street directly in front of their car. Kelly and Andrew stop, and they're like, what should we do? He's like, I'm just going to drive. I'm going to keep driving on the road. Now, to Kelly, she's like, this is a terrible idea. You're going to drive right through the light. She was certain it would hurt them. It made no sense for him to drive straight into it. So Kelly didn't know if the craft was influencing Andrew's behavior somehow, or if he was just panicking and was like, let's just keep going. But before she could argue, he hits the gas and they race toward this glowing column. But right at that moment, when they were supposed to hit the light, Kelly suddenly finds herself somewhere else. Okay, this is all according to her and what she lived through. The car was still driving down the road, but it looked to Kelly like they had jumped forward several feet. A few seconds before, they had been headed toward a roundabout, but now that same roundabout was behind them. And Kelly doesn't remember going through it. And on top of that, Andrew had been going about 60 miles per hour when he had been driving toward the light. Now he was barely hitting 25 miles per hour. And Kelly hadn't felt the car slow down. They literally just jumped. It was like they had teleported to somewhere new on the road and slowed down. Kelly couldn't explain it, so she asked Andrew, what just happened? And he had a hard time answering her. His words were just as slow. He came across as confused. To Kelly, it seemed like Andrew was waking up from a very deep sleep. And Kelly also couldn't think very clearly either. Even though she realized that she was in a very strange situation, both of them were kind of in a haze. And it didn't even occur to them to stop the car, get out, investigate, figure out what happened. Honestly, she and Andrew drove the rest of the way home in silence, both just acting a little odd. But things only get weirder when they get to their house because the clock on the wall when they arrive home said that it was 3 a.m. Now, that feels impossible because if you remember, it usually took an hour and a half to drive home from their friend's house. And they had left that house at 11:30 p.m., meaning they should have got back to their house at 1. Even if you assume that the strange light in the sky had slowed them down a little bit, there was still no way that they had been on the road for 3.5 hours without noticing it. Instead, when they get home and realize the time, they're freaking out. And Kelly feels like at some point during the trip, they must have blacked out. Perhaps it happened during that weird moment when they seemed to jump to another part of the road. But when she voiced this theory to Andrew, he dismisses it. Instead, he's like, nope, we must have read their clock wrong when we left the party. This doesn't make sense. It must have been later. Maybe they had departed from their friend's house later than they'd realized. According to him, there had to be some type of rational explanation for what they had been through tonight. But Kelly is not falling for it. It was late. She was tired. She didn't want to fight. So she just went to the restroom to get ready for bed. And this is when Kelly finds some strange evidence, this time on her own body. So Kelly goes and realizes she had begun her period, but she tracked her cycle and knew she wasn't due for it to start yet. And still, there it was. She also spotted a strange injury on her stomach, just under her belly button. It was about the size of Kelly's fingernail, so it wasn't large, but it was perfectly triangular. The edges were straight, the angles were even. And as soon as Kelly spotted it, she knew she hadn't just scratched herself or otherwise cut her stomach on accident. This wound was too precise. It was definitely there intentionally, but she didn't know who did it, why, when, how, let alone how did she not notice? The problem is that Kelly doesn't get much of a chance to investigate the injury, okay? Life goes on. The two of them disagree on what happened that night, but the rest of their life kind of just continues on. But a few weeks later, Kelly becomes seriously ill, sick enough that she needed to go to the hospital. Luckily, the doctors were able to diagnose and treat her condition, but they were pretty confused while they did so. The physicians explained to Kelly that she had developed an extremely rare kind of uterine infection. Usually, it struck women after they lost a pregnancy, but Kelly hadn't been pregnant. So the diagnosis doesn't add up. None of it does. Kelly still had no idea what had happened to her and why her life had just took this strange turn. But she decides after this possibility of learning that maybe she did lose a pregnancy, she needs to learn the truth, especially after another strange thing happened on October 1st. It had been 8 weeks since her strange encounter with the flying craft, and Kelly and Andrew got invited to another event at that same friend's house. So they were driving down the exact same road again. And each time they passed a familiar landmark, a strange memory would pop into Kelly's mind. It wasn't anything detailed, and none of these recollections lasted very long. It was more like she'd suddenly be reminded of an odd second or two here and there. She begins to remember on this drive strange faces, lights in the sky, feelings of terror. None of it makes sense, but something about these memories on this drive made Kelly feel extremely frightened and anxious. So after this visit to the friends, she goes to a psychologist who specializes in hypnotherapy. She's hoping that she can unlock some repressed memories and actually manages to. They cover a big chunk of what had happened that night. But when I say she remembered a big chunk, I want to be clear. Kelly didn't recall everything, and some of her recovered memories didn't fit with what she already knew had happened that night. For example, in hypnotherapy, she never saw what happened when her car drove into the beam of light, but she did remember something that happened a short while before then. It was while they were on the road and the strange craft was still a bit in front of them. Kelly wanted to get a better look at it, so she had convinced Andrew to pull over at the side of the road. Then they both got out of the car, and that's when Kelly saw the flying ship get brighter and brighter until it looked like a ball of light. Now, she couldn't make any other details about it, but in this repressed memory, she watched a beam of blue light come down out of the ship, and Kelly felt this compulsion to get closer to it. Oddly, she didn't feel any sense of danger or unease, almost like something was controlling her emotions somehow, making her feel very calm. And as she got closer to the beam of light, Kelly noticed 2 other cars pulling over on the side of the road. Other drivers had spotted the same thing and were coming over to investigate. Now, in this memory, Kelly didn't recognize any of these other people. They were strangers, but she still felt grateful that she wasn't alone. On some level, she knew that everything she was seeing was unbelievable, so it was good to have other unbiased witnesses to help confirm everything that was going on. So anyways, the memory continues, and Kelly held Andrew's hand as they got closer to the craft. And then, with no warning, a strange figure appeared underneath the ship in the beam of light, like it had just teleported there. The creature was too tall to be human and far too thin. They were completely black head to toe with no visible hair, clothes, or other features. And that's when Kelly heard something. To be clear, the creature was not speaking out loud. Kelly believed she was maybe reading the creature's mind, like she knew what they were thinking. She was hearing their thoughts. Specifically, they were saying that they wanted to kill Kelly, Andrew, and all of the other human beings that had gathered around, had been drawn to this. So, of course, Kelly freaked out. Things only get scarier when suddenly even more creatures appeared beside the first one. Kelly couldn't tell how many there were in total. She estimated maybe 7 or 8. And before she could run away or defend herself, they blasted her with some kind of beam of energy. Now, she says it didn't physically harm her, but it filled her with terror so intense that she could physically feel it in her bones. Later, she compared the sensation to how it feels to stand right next to a speaker that's playing very loud music. Except she wasn't next to a speaker. There was no sound, just that intense sensation. Kelly says she tried to resist it. She wanted to warn the other people they were in danger, but she only manages to get a few words out before one of the creatures punched her in the gut and knocked her unconscious. As this recovered memory continues on, Kelly says she woke up again and she was still in the field. So were Andrew and all of the other people from the road, but the vibe was different. The creatures were reassuring everyone that they came in peace and they didn't want to hurt anyone. And Kelly doesn't believe a word they're saying. In fact, she was coming to a very frightening realization. These creatures had not been sent by God like she thought. They were evil and dangerous. In fact, Kelly now believed they were aliens. They'd come to hurt the people of Earth. So she says she started screaming. She told them that she knew they were lying, and she warned the other people in the field, do not trust them. And the more she yelled, the more the extraterrestrials doubled down on their earlier claims. They insisted that they wanted to help humanity and they had good intentions. Kelly shouted back that they were horrible monsters and liars. And then, that's where the recovered memories ended. She has no idea what happened after that. What happened between then and when she found herself back in the car with her husband. And in addition, Kelly still didn't know what had happened when she and Andrew had driven into the beam of light. She didn't know where the injury under her belly button had come from. She had some educated guesses, though, after recovering this memory from somewhere in her brain. The triangle injury had been near her groin, and then she had started her period and developed a uterine infection afterward. It suggested that something might have been done to her reproductive system, maybe an experiment or perhaps harvesting of eggs. Maybe that theory is off base. It's hard to say. It's all speculation, but Kelly was sure about one thing. She could not deal with the enormity of what she had been through. This was just too much for her to fathom and handle. She needed to talk to someone who believed her and who could help her process everything. Except when she tried to talk about it with Andrew, what they had been through together, he shuts her down. In fact, he seems to get really upset and argumentative anytime she brings up their UFO encounter. Clearly, he's handling the trauma of this very differently than she was. So, since her husband wasn't any help, Kelly decided to reach out to experts. The problem was, she didn't know who the experts were in this situation. She had never had to think about the proper steps you're supposed to take if you believe you've been abducted by aliens and returned back to Earth. And since it was the 90s, the internet wasn't really a big part of most people's lives like it is today. So she turns to the phone book, actually, and she flips through it until she finds someone who's listed as a UFO researcher. Now, Kelly was hesitant to contact this guy. She didn't know if he was legit or a con artist or someone who was just completely unreasonable. But she gives him a call anyway because she is just feeling off. She doesn't feel like herself. And he referred Kelly to an organization called Phenomena Research Australia, or the PRA. And you can probably guess this from the name, but it's an Australian group that investigates alleged supernatural incidents. That includes everything from ghosts to psychic visions to UFO encounters like Kelly's. And luckily for her, they believe her. And they want to find evidence to verify it. And once they did, they could go public with their findings and prove to the world once and for all, aliens are real and we have a survivor. So the PRA sent some of their investigators out to the field where Kelly had seen the UFO, and they took soil samples to test for minerals that may have come from another planet. And they used high-tech equipment to see if there was any heightened radiation. A team with cameras photographed the field from every angle imaginable, including from above. They were looking for signs that something otherworldly had landed there. And you may remember that in her recovered memories, Kelly had seen other people get abducted that night. The drivers and passengers from 2 other cars were there. And the PRA investigators took out ads in the local papers encouraging people to reach out and contact them if anyone had been on that particular stretch of road at that time. And sure enough, you guys, before long, witnesses come forward. Countless people called the PRA's tip line to say they had seen strange lights in the sky that night. In addition, 3 separate people come forward and report that they too think they had been abducted along with Kelly, and that they knew of a 4th who didn't want to come forward. But this is huge news because it meant Kelly wasn't just making this story up or hallucinating. She had unbiased eyewitnesses who could corroborate everything. Now, all 3 of the witnesses had been in the same car together. They were a husband and his wife and their female friend. And the final witness was a man who had been driving alone in a separate car, but that man never came forward to the PRA. But based on what other people said, it sounds like he didn't get out of his car that night. He pulled over, but stayed in the driver's seat and watched as everything happened. And it's hard to say exactly what he saw, given that he never made a public statement, but I do know that the other 3 all told Kelly the same thing. And remember, this is a real story. So these people tell Kelly they remembered seeing the flying ship, pulling over, getting out of their car, but everything after that for them goes blank. They knew something strange had happened that night, and they could describe the ship perfectly, just as Kelly did. However, everything else had almost been erased from their memories. So to summarize, by this point, Kelly felt very confident that the things she remembered in therapy were real. The investigators at the PRA had supported her ever since she had come forward, and she had at least 3 witnesses who agreed with her testimony, or at least with the parts that they're able to remember. So she was ready to come forward and to make sure the general public knew about the threat that these aliens posed. Because even though she had survived, Kelly still believed that the creatures had wanted to hurt her, and the rest of the world needed to know. So she actually wrote a book about her experiences. It's called Encounter, and it came out in 1996, so 3 years after this abduction. And Encounter actually goes on to be a bestseller. Bookstores couldn't keep up with demand, and the publisher had to keep putting out new editions, and before you know it, Kelly was doing interviews with the local news and going on a press tour, and each time she talked about her book, she assured people, listen, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Kelly said soon the PRA were going to publish their findings too. And according to her, they had a 300-page report full of scientific findings and other discoveries that hadn't made it into her memoir. So to hear Kelly tell it, this follow-up text from them was going to be explosive. So, to be honest, every Australian UFO enthusiast at this point is excited. A huge amount of information was about to be revealed, except then the PRA didn't release their report. Not in 1996, and not even to this day. Their findings have never been made public on Kelly's investigation. The PRA tried to explain why they've kept all of this information to themselves, but their excuses seemed a bit strange. First, they said they want to be respectful to the eyewitnesses. Some of them didn't want every detail of their testimony to be public. They worried it would be too easy for others to learn the real identities. Or perhaps they just feared that they didn't come across very well in their statements. Supposedly, these abductees and eyewitnesses kept calling the PRA and asking them to censor more details, and the PRA wanted to honor their requests. So they cut more and more out of their report until the text that had originally been 300 pages long was now barely 100. But still, you'd think 100 pages worth of evidence would be better than nothing, except the PRA refuses to even publish that. So, after all of this happened, some people speculated that the PRA didn't release their files because they were being silenced. Perhaps someone with the Australian government was forcing them to keep this report to themselves. The problem was there was no proof of government cover-up, and a lot of skeptics had a different theory, that the PRA just simply had nothing to publish. Maybe they'd never found any evidence to support Kelly's story. Some people even think maybe Kelly made the entire abduction up. If that was the case, she may have also been lying when she said that the PRA believed her and had hundreds of pages of evidence to verify this. After all, those alleged eyewitnesses from the other cars have never come forward. There's no sign that these people even existed. But it gets even worse than this, because Kelly's husband, Andrew, starts getting calls from reporters and journalists who want to hear his side of the story. Like, you were with her that night. What do you remember? They're like, do you remember getting abducted? Do you think Kelly's making it up? And he refuses to comment. He didn't necessarily accuse Kelly of lying, but he also never told them that she was saying the truth. Now, I want to be clear about one thing. Kelly and Andrew divorced in June of 1995, so after the UFO incident, but before her book came out. According to her, the stress of their abduction was just too much on their marriage. They grew apart until it was impossible to remain married. And in light of that, it could be that Andrew refused to comment because he just wanted to put the entire situation behind him. But the question is, what's he wanting to forget? Is it a traumatic abduction? Or is it his suspicions that his wife, who he loved, had jumped off into a completely different life? It's hard to know for sure who was telling the truth. However, we can look at Kelly's intentions to see if she might have had an incentive to make up the abduction. And the first one's pretty obvious: money. She made a lot on her best-selling book, Encounter. Not as much as you might think. See, Encounter has been out of print for years. So if you want to buy a copy, you have to get it used. And Kelly obviously doesn't make anything from used book sales. It's not like she's still making money. And if Kelly was making the story up, you might have expected her to write a follow-up or go on more press tours and try to generate more interest in her book. But instead, after 1998, she kind of just faded from the spotlight. It was like Kelly didn't even want to be famous. She didn't even want to talk about the abduction anymore. In fact, at some point in the early 2000s, she moved out of town and didn't tell anyone how to get a hold of her. Meaning, even if reporters had wanted to interview her or promote her book, they couldn't have. I do know at some point she came back home, and she's mostly living as a private citizen now. Kelly stays out of the limelight and under the radar, and if you were to meet her on the street today, you'd never even suspect that she'd allegedly been abducted by aliens and had this huge piece of her life she'd written a book about. So to this day, opinions are very divided on Kelly and her infamous UFO story. Some people think she's a con artist. Others believe she really was abducted by aliens. But there's also a third theory. Kelly wasn't lying on purpose, but she did mistake a dream or hallucination for an actual abduction. See, Kelly had a long history of strange supernatural feeling experiences. She wrote about this in her book. Like how one night before the abduction, she had been praying in her room and she was going through a low point in terms of her faith. And she didn't know if she could go on believing in God. So she asked him for some kind of sign. And according to her book, suddenly she experienced a sensation that was almost like she was downloading all of this information directly into her brain. And she said she suddenly knew a bunch of facts that she hadn't before and understood complicated concepts that had once been confusing to her. Now, at the time, Kelly believed this was God communicating with her, but in her book, Encounters, she suggested that maybe she'd actually psychically connected with the alien ship. She also wrote that after the abduction, extraterrestrial creatures had visited her in her bedroom night after night. In her book, she described these incidents as nightmarish. She said the aliens had tried to harm her and steal her soul. Now, Kelly saw this as a sign that aliens were particularly interested in her, interested enough to target her before the abduction and then keep tabs on her afterward. But some other people think it's more likely she had some kind of mental health condition and she may have been experiencing delusions. And if that's true, it makes this story even more tragic because it suggests that Kelly went through something that felt very traumatic and terrifying for her. The emotions were authentic, that she believed them, even if the experience wasn't real and ended her marriage. The truth is, at the end of the day, all we have are our perceptions. They feel very real to us, even if they're inaccurate. To be clear, I don't know for sure if Kelly was abducted by aliens or not. And from the sound of things, I think there might be evidence to either prove or debunk her claim, but it's not available to the public. Apparently, it's in a confidential PRA file somewhere. Still, we can all take comfort in knowing that the truth is out there somewhere, but it's probably not in our brains. And that is the story of Kelly's UFO encounter. This UFO incident is pretty infamous in the alien community, so I'm glad I was able to share it with you guys. Let me know in comments what you think about this, and I'll see you next time as we go further into the dark together. Goodbye.